Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartlidge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. But we will start today's episode where I'm super excited to be welcoming back to the show two previous guests. Firstly, Dr. Susan Friedman, a retired psychology professor at Utah State University, who has pioneered the application of applied behavior analysis, ABA, to captive and companion animals, and the excellent Rick Hester, the curator of behavioral husbandry for the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo in Colorado. There, Rick oversees all the zoo's behavioural programs, including animal training for husbandry, medical, public show behaviours, enrichment, developing programs to improve problem behaviour situations, and the zoo's formal animal welfare assessments. And since 2015, Rick has also worked for Dr. Friedman's Behaviour Works as a consultant and course co-instructor. So Rick and Susan, welcome back to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. It is wonderful to have you both here again with us.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Nice to be in the audio realm with you.
And I'm excited to have this relatively young sharing with our community collaboration, because we're recording this episode off the back of Clicker Expo where you two both work together. Do you want to share with our audience about what you got up to there?
Yeah, Susan and I collaborate on a presentation there modeling the consultant relationship. I've had the great fortune to work with Susan for many years now, and she's partnered with Cheyenne Mountain Zoo for that entire time. And so we have this long history together where Susan consults with us and watches our training and gives us feedback. And so we really model that. In that presentation, we train animals live, streaming live, and we are usually training them for active behaviors, things we're actively working on teaching animals, and then we get Susan's feedback and can model what that process can look like and all the many benefits to learners from that relationship.
Yeah, and I heard wonderful things from my peers on social media about their experience attending your offering together. So that's pretty exciting, and hopefully we're going to see more of that in the future.
Yeah, it's a joy to do. And so the more venues we're able to show what the relationship of consultants and clients looks like, and also really the most contemporary application of our behavior science to a low intrusion approach, a high positive reinforcement approach to teaching animals what they need to know to succeed living with humans. So, I mean, the training there is extraordinary, and I always learn more than I teach. That is absolutely for sure.
An exciting species for many individuals who predominantly work with domestic animals. Are you liking jumping in this different audience and conversations?
Yeah, it's really great to share our different experiences, and Clicker Expo I really enjoy being part of it because it does bring together people from so many different communities to share our ideas and different applications of this science that is so powerful. So it's been really, really fun, and it's always fun to to hear from different communities and to get their feedback on some of the things that we're teaching and thoughts of things we can change and improve. It's really a great collaborative 3 days.
Yeah, and to cross the chasm of the universality of what you guys are doing at the zoo with regards to the horses and the cats and the dogs and the parrots that live in people's homes is an exciting thought to me, to know that those conversations are happening more. And we talked before we pushed record that our mutual colleague, Tim Sullivan, was also there from the zoo world. So I'm thrilled to hear all the positive feedback and to know how excited you guys are about it and excited about more in the future. For everyone listening, a little bit of background as to how this episode you're about to listen to originated. Rick, you emailed me back in October last year. It took us a while to all get together, saying that you and Susan had been chatting about your daughter Perrin's sudden intense fear of riding in cars, and at that point in time you were working to change that. You thought it might be cool if you, Susan, and I did a podcast episode together about what it's like to parent with some ABA knowledge on board, which I wholeheartedly agreed with, of course. So I was hoping maybe to get us started, Rick, perhaps you could share with everyone what was happening back in October 2021 with Perrin and riding in cars, and where are you with that now?
So in late summer, parents started to behave really fearfully around riding in cars, and it came on really suddenly. At the time, it seemingly came out of nowhere, which we could probably better describe as related to conditions and learning histories that we just don't yet understand. We know it didn't come from nowhere, but it was surprising. I didn't predict it. We were driving down the highway, and Perrin and I have a couple of days where each week where we're together, just the two of us all day. And one day we spend exploring. So we're walking or driving around, going just to look at different things in the community. And so we're driving down the highway, and she was looking, and I kept checking on her in the rearview mirror, and she was playing with some toys in her lap. And then she suddenly looked up, and I happened to be looking at her in the mirror, and her eyes got really wide, her legs stiffened, arms stiffened, pushed way back into her seat, and started to say, "Dad, stop the car, Dad, stop the car, Dad, stop the car." And I'm on the highway surrounded by other cars, so and I didn't know what was going on, but I told her I'll stop the car. But I knew I couldn't do it immediately, so I reminded her that, we're in the Subaru, I'm driving, you're in your car seat, and she relaxed, and then she was actually fine with us continuing to drive. And a few minutes later, she started talking about a little kid roller coaster that we had ridden on weeks earlier. And so we talked about maybe for a moment, it felt like you were on that roller coaster. She didn't enjoy the roller coaster after trying it twice. She tried it once and wanted off. We got off. Right away, she wanted to get back on and try again. So we tried again, and then we didn't like it, so got off again, and we didn't return to that. But we had been driving for weeks since then without any challenges. And so a few minutes after this event, she started talking about the roller coaster. So we talked about that dot connection, and we drove around the rest of the day. And she was relaxed, and so I didn't really think much of it. And then it happened again a few days later with Mandy, my wife, driving Perrin around, and then it kind of just became more prevalent from there. She started behaving to avoid the car, was really uncomfortable in the car all the time. And took a lot of encouragement and some upset to get her in the car at all. And so I remember that we set up after days of completely avoiding the car, we set up a trip to the lake with her cousins, just a 10-minute drive, thinking maybe we can incentivize a car ride with something really valuable, drive really slow, hopefully bring her into contact with a comfortable ride and overcome the sort of avoidance of the car. And we did make it to the lake with a lot of encouragement and some discomfort with Perrin, but that really persisted. So it became clear to Mandy and I that we'd have to build a bit more of a program around this to help her overcome that. And so what that looked like in part, one was that Perrin could tell me to slow the car down anytime, and immediately the car would slow down in some noticeable way. So she would say, "Dad, go a little slower," and I'd slow down. And we were driving around town like with hazard lights on at like 5 miles an hour. So I was not popular on the roads. And then I would slow down anytime that she asked me to, and or stop the car if she asked me to. And she did ask often in the early days of practicing it. And throughout the weeks, we worked on this for maybe 3 months. And how fortunate am I to be parenting with Susan Friedman on speed dial. So talk about winning the mentor and friend and colleague lottery. And I'm really grateful. And so I'm texting with Susan throughout, and she added two really important components that really augmented what we were doing. And one was to think of ways we could provide even more control, or the perception of control, to Perrin when she was in the car. And I still have a text from Susan, I looked at it yesterday, where she said, the research suggests that it's the perception of control that really matters. And I bet you she would be way more comfortable if she had her own steering wheel. And not only does she make the suggestion, but the next day on my front porch is a Tory steering wheel that Susan has shipped to our house. And so that was really cool to see a confidence increase. I've got some video I sent to Susan of Perrin in the back seat, pressing the horn button and steering the car. And so not only did I see all that enthusiastic activity with the steering wheel, but there was a reduction in asking me to slow down when she had that steering wheel. So that was really, really cool. And then the other thing that Susan guided us to is the importance for Perrin to have an understanding that these feelings inside that we call fear are important. That they're a mechanism that your body uses to keep you safe, but that sometimes your body misinterprets. And so when you feel fear, you can look to the environment and then make a decision about whether or not you are safe. And so we made a checklist of the things that we do before we drive. And because we do them, we can be comfortable in the car. And so it was, she's in her car seat and the buckles are buckled. I'm in the driver's seat and my buckle is buckled. Someone trusted is driving the car. All of the doors are closed. So we went through this checklist at the start, and then we would go out driving. And once we had that, what would happen periodically is Perrin would say, "Dad, did we do the checklist?" And I would remind her, "Yeah, we did the checklist," and we go over it again. And then she said, the first time she did this, she said, "Okay, body, you are mistaken." And then we rode on. So you could see that she was starting to respond to those feelings and take action, look to the environment and then make a decision about whether or not she was safe. And those two pieces of this program were just incredible. And now that we are, in, what is it now? It's February. So after about 3 months of that, I faded the prompts out. I stopped prompting the checklist. Sometimes she would do it. And then she stopped asking me to slow down. We just started riding in the car normally. Throughout all of this, I'm just slowly increasing the speeds that we drive, slowly getting on roads that look more similar to the highway where she was initially afraid, all without any discussion at all. That's just kind of coming along while she's actively doing these other things, the checklists, and has the steering wheel, and just sort of fading in that difficulty gradually. The first time we got on the highway, I didn't say anything about it. I hopped on, drove down the highway for 10 minutes, got off, and I said, Perrin, do you know what road we just drove on? And she let out a big old gasp and said, that was the superhighway, and so we celebrated that she had been able to do that. And so some really cool things about it, I think, one, she can ride in the car again, which is important. That gives us access to a lot of opportunities. Our life on foot, we try to walk as many places as we can, but obviously there are limitations. So, during the weeks where we really couldn't drive anywhere, she's limited. We can't get to a swimming pool. We won't be able to get to school, so there's a lot of limitations related to that. So she has access to all those things now, but she's also had this experience of overcoming that challenge and doing it by making changes in the environment and actively doing it. So she has this information that it's a natural part of life, right? That we feel afraid, and that there are things that we can do about it, and that we can change our environment so that we can be successful. And she can do something now that she couldn't do for a period of time, but it was an active process. And so, she really likes this song called Conqueror by Aurora. And so she plays that song when she's in the car because she's conquered her fear of car riding. And so she's a conqueror, and she's really, now she rides with this, riding in the car is a big deal. She's still really proud that she can do that. And of course, there's a lot of praise, and I'm sure we'll talk about praise today and what we mean by that. But, for all the hard work that she put into that, overcoming that.
Well, firstly, thank you for sharing that, because the story is inspiring, and so many lessons for everyone listening, and for me, and also it was a personal story. So we're grateful for you inviting us into your family, and overcoming this struggle. That's very appreciated. Susan, I can see you nodding your head and smiling at various points and places. Do you want to add anything at this point?
No, I think that was a really instructional and interesting, heart-filling retell. There were pieces of it that I'd forgotten, and I didn't know about the Conqueror, so I'm going to be listening to that as soon as we're done, because that's a great add-on, too, to carry one success in your history forward to the next challenge is really something we want kids to understand and be aware of and have confidence doing. So what a beautifully run program, and what a great meeting of minds, Mandy and Rick and I all together. Definitely on Perrin's team for the rest of her life, I hope. Or the rest of my life, I guess, given our age differential. So yeah, it was a privilege to be included in that think tank and to enjoy the success.
Oh, and I should add, I don't know if I said, but Perrin was 4 years old at the time, and she's 5 years old now. If I left that out, that's probably a piece of information of interest.
You read my mind. I liked a lot of the take. Well, I got a lot of takeaways, and I liked a lot of your way of framing Perrin's journey there. I think the listeners of the show can take away a lot from just the way you talked about the situation. Some of the things that stood out to me was you said it was surprising when Perrin first showed these fearful behaviours, and you said it's conditions and learning histories that we don't understand. So the initial behaviours were surprising, but my understanding from the story you just shared is through talking to Perrin, you quickly kind of started to put some dots together.
Yeah, we did. And Susan said this really well the other day in a different webinar on parenting, but we can't always track that higher order conditioning that accounts for being afraid of things that that won't necessarily hurt you, that don't make sense, phobias, whatever we want to call them. So it's not necessary, I would say, to have that dot connection in order to do something about it. But with Perrin, there were clues right away. The bringing up the roller coaster just a couple of moments afterwards was a pretty big tip off. And one thing that was cool about that, and Mandy did this with Perrin, and then it came to mind for Susan as well. So she messaged me about it. But it was important to all of us that Perrin understood that this challenge, this fear you experience related to the car, is a product of learning history, a product of these systems in place in your body, that there's nothing wrong with you. This is part of what happens on the planet, and that we have active ways to overcome it when it does. But that lots of people end up with fears of things like this, and there are things we can do about it. And that it's not just inside her. We have a rationale that makes sense, that this is, for a moment in the car, it felt like your body alerted to you that you might be on a roller coaster and you don't want to be on one again. So, that's the alert, and there's just some misinterpretation going on there. But so Mandy and Perrin had a lot of conversations about that, and Perrin had a pretty good grasp on what was going on, and that she could work to overcome it.
Wonderful. And I liked your explanation as well about the observable behaviors you saw from Perrin. You said eyes wide, arms stiffened, which I imagine would have been quite shocking for you to look back and see that as you're driving along. What was going through your head when you saw that?
At first I was wondering, do we have a wasp in the car? Did she just get stung by something? I'm looking in the car and her car seat for anything that jumps out at me that might be causing pain. That was my first thought, that maybe she was in pain. Everything looks normal back there, but I could see how far back she was pressed into her seat. Like many of us will do if, I have a couple of friends, that's what I look like when they're driving in my seat. And so, I could relate to that and thought, okay, this has something to do with the riding. And that's when I started to talk to her about reminding her, drawing her attention to, you're in the Subaru, your car seat's there, there's your cup holder, there's your toys. I'm going to stop the car, but here's where you are and what's going on. Because I couldn't stop just immediately because of where we were driving. So I had to find a pull off, that was safe, but she relaxed as we talked about where we were and what was going on. And then she started talking about the roller coaster shortly after that.
And I resonate with your gratitude for having Susan Friedman on speed dial with regards to parenting. I remember the first time Susan and I talked about parenting, I felt very similar. I just imagine that so many parents would be completely stumped here. Rick, you've messaged me saying you'd like to do a podcast about what it's like to parent with ABA knowledge on board. The rest of the world, a significant amount of people without ABA knowledge on board would just be really stumped here, and it would escalate. It could escalate quite quickly, I imagine. So on that note, just gratitude that we get to share that experience of parents and yours and Mandy's. More gratitude to you, Rick, for sharing that and modeling for us an approach to that. I'm sure that it's going to help so many people who listen to this podcast and those who have parents, friends that are parents. Has Perrin applied these experiences to other situations in her life? Has she made other checklists?
She hasn't. I don't think that we've made other checklists, although we did do practice checklists before the car list. So the first day we were going to use this was Susan's suggestion. The day we were going to use the car checklist for the first time, I made checklists for everything we were doing. Backpack checklist, getting ready in the morning checklist. So it was the day of checklists, and then when we got to the car, we just did the car checklist. It fit right in to the day. I don't know that she's used another checklist since then, but It's been really interesting to raise a kid where for their whole life they have an understanding of how behavior works. I didn't grow up that way. I first came into contact with it when I was 23, when I took Susan's LLA course for the first time. And, at that point I had grown up, obviously, and been in the animal profession. It was part of my job to change what animals did. And I didn't know any of this. And here comes this person who says, hey, there's a science behind this. Behavior is related to the environment. And that you can use this to effectively and humanely change behavior. And ever since the very first lecture, I've been completely obsessed with it because it's so powerful. I still remember leaving that class and thinking, what else would you want to know other than this? How could I spend my time learning anything but this now that I know that it's out there? And so it's cool to see Perrin grow up. She looks to the environment for explanations of everyone's behavior. That's just the way that she's learned to interact with the world, to view the world. She has that understanding. So when the cat is doing, the cat's interfering with a game she's playing, she just gets up and goes and gives the cat some food and comes back and says, I gave the cat something else to do because I didn't want them to be here. And I thought that they might stay away if they had something else to do. So I gave them some food. Or just the other day, the dog ran up to the front door, our dog Daisy. And when she gets to doorways, any barrier that she's behaving to get to the other side, she lifts up onto her hind legs, which we've inadvertently taught her to do. And parents said, why does Daisy jump up on her hind legs when she gets to the door? And I said, why do you think she does that? And she said, because we open it afterwards. And, that's a 5-year-old that has that understanding that behavior has function. And that is what everybody is doing. We're behaving to change the world around us to suit ourselves better. And it's really, really cool to see a kid that has that on board right away. And I'll be really excited to see her as she grows and views the world kind of through that, I don't know what we'd call it, that operant porthole, where, we understand that we're behaving for effect.
Beautifully said. I also really liked, and Susan, I think you might have piped in at that point. Oh, no, Rick, you said Susan shared something with you during your journey, and that was that it's the perception of control that's potentially more important than control. Is that the right way of saying that?
I think we lean on Susan to give us the most expert recount of that.
No, and I would lean on the people who are really studying this to double check. But my understanding and what makes sense to me is that you don't always actually have to have control. But if you perceive that you have control, that will produce the same empowering effects. So this comes from studies where people didn't actually control the outcome, but they perceived that they did. And the emotions that tracked that perception of control were happy and more confident. And I'd need to look back at those studies. I haven't looked at them in a couple of years, but I read them when I was preparing that emotions talk, and that's the nut of it. So the fact that she wasn't really driving the car was not as important as her perceiving that she had control by using this toy steering wheel. And it was just, I didn't have past experience with 4-year-olds afraid of cars accelerating and speed and mock steering wheels. But this is the way in which we all in our community are getting better and faster at connecting the dots between what we know from a principles point of view, the principles of behavior, and connecting the dots in new, fresh, and creative ways. So it really does, there's so much to get from this experience that I was fortunate enough to share with Mandy and Rick and Perrin. That idea that we're not talking about something mundane or mechanistic in the sense that those words are used as negatives, where the sky is the limit in terms of how we creatively adapt and apply these principles based on the specific setting and the particular learner. Yeah. So I'm always looking about the perception of control and how that boosts my confidence to do something that's hard, uncomfortable, or scary. That mainly has to do with dentists, you know. So, yeah, it's an important skill set to give people.
Yeah, and it's an important contribution because it leads to ideas like providing Perrin with a steering wheel. I think when you emailed me, Rick, you're like, we should do it with Susan because, I mean, Susan brought Perrin a steering wheel. I mean, come on. I think they were your words in the email.
I love behavior, but any opportunity to shop is to bring the two together, a behavior change program and shopping opportunity is perfectly my cup of tea. So, yeah, that was really a lot of fun. And then Mandy made her a paper license with her little head on it and her funny little hair. And she was so proud to have her license right next to her steering wheel in the car seat. And Rick really kind of undertold what you did to boost that perception of control. You know, you included her in, okay, I'm ready to take off. Are you ready back there, my co-pilot? And she said, yeah, I'm ready. And he said, okay, here we go. You know, okay, we're going to turn right. Let's go. And so there were all these other learning opportunities about right from left, stopping upon a stop signal, accelerating on a go signal, looking at the cars around you. And there she is in the back, just taking care of business, you know. So, yeah, it was a combination, I guess, of a DRO, a differential reinforcement of other behavior, which could be more salient than her fear at that moment. So we could call that DRO, and the benefits of some planned distraction, which is a technique we all use when we need it and is good to teach children. How can you put your mind somewhere else to give you an alleviation of the fear and pressure you're experiencing now? And then some of the real, basic skills of left, right, start, go, caring for the people who are driving by you. Ooh, someone wants to come in now, so we're going to back off that pedal and let them in. And, like everything, even the smallest interactions are just so dense with teaching opportunities in that parent role. It's no wonder it was one of my favorite teaching opportunities in my lifetime. And I always tease Rick. I'll often send pictures of my 33 and 35-year-old daughters so that I say he can see his future. These incredible adults, contributors, and family members are one way it looks when you raise children with this information and this culture of empowerment and looking to the environment and how it influences what we do and what others do.
And I hope we get to hear some stories soon about your 33 and 34-year journey, Susan. Just want to raise one more thing, Rick, that I really liked from your story with Perrin, and that was teaching Perrin to check in with her environment when she felt fear. Have I understood that correctly? And so that was, for example, checking with Dad. Did we do the checklist? How did those conversations? How else did you communicate to Perrin to navigate those situations?
We had conversations earlier, probably from the time there was a verbal dialogue going on about recognizing internal feelings, observing internal feelings, and then deciding what you're going to do. So things like hunger and fatigue, tiredness, so that you can observe that you're hungry. You have ways that you can behave to get food, and then feel better. So we had that kind of dialogue on board, but I hadn't connected the dots to this situation. Susan helped me do that it would be important for her to have that understanding. And so I think that all of our conversations around it actually happened while driving, and talking about, the dot connection between that feeling of fear, just like you felt on the roller coaster. And here's what that is, right? It's a defense mechanism that your body has to alert you to potential danger. But then there are things that we can do, and look to the environment, because sometimes it misinterprets. It's not always correct. And Perrin is really interested in how the physical body works. And so that's been something we also have talked about as long as we've been talking is, this is how a hand works, and this is what it allows us to do, and this is what a heart does, and this is what lungs do, and this is what an esophagus does. And so she's very interested in all of that, so we also had that. So she was really interested to learn about this sort of internal fear response, and I think it's also important that it is, that she has that understanding that it is a natural part of our body, that it is part of our biology, and that it's an important part. Nothing's wrong with you for feeling fear. In fact, it's really important that we feel fear, but maybe not all the time, right? So we're going from there.
And I remember us talking about, check my memory out on this, my recall out, that it started with you going through the checklist. So you would say the different items that were controllable, like, brake on, windows closed, locks on, seatbelt on, car seat buckled as well. And then there was a point at which we talked about transferring that to her so that you were not the one who was driving, going through the checklist, but you had her go through the checklist. And you could say, check, check, check. And Mandy could say, check, check, check. I remember some video. And then the idea of, okay, let's just see where it goes without prompting it. So transferring the checklist control to her and then fading the prompt. Are we ready? What's up with the checklist? So that she would be able to move past that strategy when she didn't need it any longer. And I remember learning that with my first daughter, Margaret Marnie, when her first refusal ever was when one day she pitched up refusing to allow me to put her shoes on her feet. And I thought, what on earth is this? I've been buckling those little shoes, for months and months and a year or two, and now she's kicking her feet. And it took me, a good day or two to hypothesize that it was her way, a reasonable way given her young age, to tell me that she didn't want me to put shoes on her feet, that she wanted to do it herself. I mean, it's obvious she didn't want them on, but I wanted to explore more about what the function might be. And once I came up with the idea that that might be what was underneath it, I allowed her to choose, of course, the shoes. So we ended up with shoes on the wrong feet and 2 different kinds of shoes and all sorts of funny but unimportant events around her putting on the shoes. But that took care of that negative response. And I really held on to that idea that you have to be alert all the time as a parent for the child to give you the information when they're ready to be independent of you. Because if it was up to me, I'd be putting her shoes on for her before she goes to court as a lawyer in the morning. It would be my pleasure to help her in that way. And so, like a good behavior consultant, effective behavior consultant, an effective therapist, an effective parent, one of the main things we have to keep track of and be responsive to is when the learner is ready to be independent of the teacher and to not go over that point where they've given you that information and insist on their dependence because it's reinforcing to us, so that they give up on the independence and go back to dependence, even though they were ready to be set free. And all from that one experience with her kicking her feet when I was trying to put shoes on. She might have been just under 2. So yeah, that's important, as well as recognizing that we wanted to continue to do probes are you ready to take this over? Do you still need me to be captaining the checklist ship? Or are you ready to take it over? And then if I don't prompt it, are you ready to let it go? So I thought you and Mandy were incredibly sensitive about the nuanced information Perrin was giving you that she didn't need that heavy, systematic, structured intervention. She was ready for you to start fading all of that and just to hop in the car, get her seatbelt on, and take off down the superhighway. Now, that's an important part of, I think, your success and what I've learned over the years as well.
We did the same fading procedure with the steering wheel. Because I would hand it to her, make sure that it was working, and then it came to, I would just have it sitting next to her seat when she got in, and she would get it herself at some point early on in the drive, and then she just stopped picking it up. It was there, available if she wanted it, but she just stopped picking it up, and now it's not something we keep track of. It's around somewhere, but it became unimportant. But that same kind of procedure where we faded that control over to her. She's the one actually getting the steering wheel, and then it's up to her. And then she just stopped picking it up.
See, I think that's amazing. That's so smart and such great teaching. And it speaks to the importance, and this is my bias as a special educator, my bias about the importance of prompts, and that the idea that there's something gained by not prompting is often a mistake, and that if we use prompts well, the difficulty factor is fading them at the right time, knowing when to fade them, knowing how quickly to fade them or to reduce intensity. This idea of prompting and fading is a really rich source of good teaching technique. And there's quite a lot about prompting and fading from the human child literature that I recommend people working with animal behavior go to. Ways of prompting that are the least intense prompt to the most, so that the child can be the most independent first, and then you add prompt intensity only if they show they need it, which is my usual preferred approach, or the most prompt first, which leaves them most dependent on the prompt. And that would be an example of the steering wheel and the checklists. And then reducing the intensity to the least, which in many cases, the learner tells you they're ready for it to go down, down, down. So both of those approaches. And then there are a few other approaches to consider around prompting, and really learning that the skill of it is in the attentive observation of when to start fading that prompt and when it may be brought back and then faded again. There's a lot of great teaching skill in prompting and fading.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's bringing many current situations and summer behavior. My daughter, up in my mind as you're both talking, I'm really enjoying relating my experiences to the things you're saying. Rick, earlier you mentioned watching a presentation that Susan had recently done. Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, the title of that presentation being How to Like Your Kids While You Raise Them, which is a hilarious name for a presentation. And for me, as a relatively new parent, I thought it was jam-packed with thoughts, actionable ideas and stories. I recently had the pleasure of watching it as well. So my idea moving forward in this conversation, Rick and Susan, is just to prompt discussion by mentioning some of these ideas, throwing out some questions about them and seeing where we go. How does that sound?
It sounds great. And I'll just interject for interest's sake that the spirit in which I came up with that title is my confidence that our children will be successful, contributing people just because they're raised by caring, contributing parents. So to the best of their ability, they will reflect their parents, their parents' love and compassion and skills. So I always worry less about what these children will be like as adults, which is often the focus of parenting advice, building good adults at the end game. I'm perfectly confident they'll be great adults in the end game. It's about really liking them while you get to that adult stage, because we spend an awful lot of time together. And if you don't like being together, then it's really an unhappy home. And so that's the point that I hope to make with that, is that so many parents talk about their children as though they're such a burden, and they're so stubborn, and they're so uncooperative, and they're driving me crazy, and I need a vacation. And I hear so much of those unhappy negative utterances that the idea of helping people parent and enjoy the job and the experience more is really, would really be the heart of the matter of that presentation.
Well, thank you. I hadn't thought to ask about how you came up with that, so I appreciate you sharing. And that was for the Tag Teach membership. If you wanted to go and check that out, that's online. And Susan, you've also presented that at Clicker Expo, am I correct?
I have, and I have to give a shout out to them too. I mean, what kind of craziness is this to have me teach about parenting at a essentially dog behavior conference? But they've got that wide view of the applicability of these principles. So I'm very fortunate to be able to have that platform to teach from.
And one thing, as you were talking, Rick, earlier, not one thing, many things, you were saying remind me of some of the ideas, stories, and thoughts that Susan shared in her presentation. One of them being you practicing the checklists before actually doing the checklists for the car. Susan, you talked about role-playing a lot, or not a lot, but you talked about role-playing in this presentation. Would you say that that's what Rick was doing with those checklists? What is role-playing, and why is it? And why do you feel it's important for parents to consider using this strategy?
Yeah, it was interesting for me to hear. I didn't know that Rick and Mandy had been using checklists that day for all the other chains of behavior that they were going to go through with parent. I think what's really effective about having done that, rather than just use the car checklist, is it took some of the salience off the car checklist. So that's really clever teaching. If we have checklists for cleaning up after breakfast, and a checklist for feeding the animals, and a checklist for picking our clothes according to the weather, and something parents not so great at, matching her clothes to the weather, as we see her out in her fairy costume and 2 feet of snow, because as she reports, it's a winter wonderland. That was really, I think, worth pointing out to people, that it takes the salience off of the checklist for the behavior target we're really looking at, which is the car behavior, by distributing checklists across everything we do. If we put too much salience on the car program, sometimes it can work in the other direction, where kids will be getting so much social reinforcement from the problem that they may choose to stay in problem form. So this is absolutely very demanding teaching. Is the kid going to go this way with it? Is the kid going to go that way with it? And I think that there are things we can do that reduce the likelihood that they're going to go in a direction we don't want them to go in, like acting afraid, showing fearful behavior in the car, just because of all the attention that it garnered. So that was really a great approach, to have many checklists, and then the car checklist was just another checklist. About role-playing, it's really about trying to create the opportunity for reinforced practice with feedback and other reinforcers. Hopefully, we're always teaching our children that feedback is a reinforcer as well, because more information that allows us to do things better can be experienced as a positive reinforcer. And so they want feedback from us more. And that's the way I see it. We call it role-playing. And I think that phrase role-playing means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But what I'm looking for is the opportunity to select with consequences the behavior that we want to see more. And so if we want behavior more, we've got to practice setting up the environment to evoke that behavior and to be there to catch it with our feedback, in the way of positive and even suggestions, critical feedback, as well as other reinforcers. So what better way than to take the pressure off the restaurant, for example, where there might have been an undesired behavior. I mentioned yesterday, like Leah persisting in going under the table. Then setting up a restaurant here and having practice with her, being able to go to the bathroom, being able to look around the restaurant and engage with other people visiting there, to do lots of things, including sitting in the seat, but not going under the dirty, yucky table. So we did a lot of those practice simulations where it would be easier to do it correctly and contact the reinforcers for that. And we call that role play. So that was all over the place. And we really got into it. When it came time to role play going down the toy aisle, Leah, who's a great kind of mechanic anyway, she took everything out of the cupboards, all of her toys, everything out of the kitchen, to put together a little supermarket and or one of these big stores that has an aisle for everything. And then we were able to go down the aisles and practice going through the toy aisle or the sweets aisle, expressing what you wish for, but not always taking it home. And that practice then allowed me to help her contact the reinforcers for just saying what you wish for can be very reinforcing. And the social praise of not, of being able to go through without the tantrum, and then generalizing that back to the big store for just a quick walk through and then more natural flow of shopping. So yeah, does that give you some idea about where that role play and why role play, where the demands on behavior are lighter because you're at home, where there's a whole lot of social reinforcement for building the simulation and for being able to practice, including having a misbehaved doll set up who's melting down on the ground, and how uncomfortable it must be for the child to have to cry and yell that way, and how much it hurts our ears. And wouldn't it be better if they had other forms of communication for what they wished for? And yeah, lots of drama in this house around those role plays.
In doing some practice where the demands are lighter because you're at home is not just applicable to our kids. We do that with our domestic non-human co-learners frequently as well. So I think there's some really neat parallels to draw there. Rick, what was your thought process when you were doing these checklists? Did they align with the benefits that Susan outlined there, or is this something that you do with other behaviours with parent, practicing things first in the same way that you did with a checklist? What was your thought process there?
It did tie into with what Susan was explaining earlier, that if we did checklists all day, then it wouldn't add that saliency to the car. That I don't want the car to seem like a big deal, right? It's the only place we need all these things. And so the idea came from a conversation with Susan over text. And so we just checklisted all day. And it was, at least in part, that was the goal, that it wouldn't have been hard to prompt a checklist in the car without practicing. So I don't know that we needed the practice necessarily in order to do the checklist, but it was more about not having it be so salient when we got to the car. But then we could reference it when we were driving, of course, that we had done something to make ourselves safe, that it wasn't just, you're safe because I said so. You're safe because we took these actions. You did these things yourself, or helped do them. And on the topic of role playing, it definitely ties into with what we're talking about with animals. Teach it where it's easy, and then fade in the difficulty. And there's a good example of it with Perrin and Mandy. I think maybe Perrin was 3, And anytime she was frustrated, so, a situation where she's behaving for an outcome and didn't produce it as expected, then she would hit the closest adult. So even if it wasn't related to you at all, it was putting a Barbie doll's leg back on, or if you were the nearest adult, then you got hit. And Mandy set up mock situations that were so frustrating, and they would both pretend to be so frustrated about this situation where they couldn't produce some outcome that they wanted, and rather than hit each other, they would stomp their feet and as an alternative, and talked all about just the social benefits of stomping your foot as opposed to hitting the person nearest by, and why we care about the experience of the person near us, and it physically hurts them when you hit them, and they also might not want to stand so close to you if they're going to get hit a lot. So there are outcomes that produces that you might not be interested in, and we can stomp instead. So they mocked up these frustrating situations for a day, and they practiced stomping their feet. And the next time I was with Perrin on one of our days together, Mandy and I alternate which one of us is at the zoo and which one of us is with Perrin. So one of us is in one of these places each day, both places. We just changes who's where. And so the next day that I was with Perrin, some situation occurred, and she said, "I'm not going to hit you," and stomped her feet. And so, it would be really hard, maybe not even achievable, for us to teach that in those situations, as it is the case with many animals, that it's a lot more successful to teach them in a context where it's easier, and then fade that difficulty in there.
Yeah, lots of opportunities for parents to do this. I think there's a desire to role play. If you go to the toy aisle in a large department store, there's little mini kitchens and little mini sinks and little mini iron boards. And I know Sapphire, my wife, really wanted to do some role playing with Summer before we took to the doctors for the first time. So we brought a mini doctor kit, and we're getting her used to all of the different things you might see at the doctor's office. So beneficial to think about using those as well, and how we can teach, like you say, more desirable behaviors than hitting people.
That's really a great example as well. The doctor's office preparation, dentists. I'm thinking right now, it occurs to me, as it did yesterday, working for the TAG group, Joan Orr, that we're talking very much about children who have strong vocal, verbal repertoires, who can process all of this language, and who can give us back a fair amount of language as well. And so how do we customize some of these basic principles to map to children who don't bring that to the parenting interaction with us? And it can be done, and it is being done. And I think of Sean's great work and others who have really led the way to what it looks like to apply these basic principles to children who come with different skills and different needs. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we are talking about kids who fall into a particular class of behaviors that are very verbal, and that isn't always the case. It means that we need to custom fit the principles differently to some extent, but the basics are still the same. And I often make the point that, we are working, when we work with non-human animals, with animal learners who don't share the verbal bridge with us, and we use the same principles. And so the difference between a vocal language and verbal language is an important one. I think that what is called conventionally body language is indeed a class of behavior that communicates to others in influential ways. So that idea that what we're really looking for are ways to communicate, that is to influence one another with some system, whether it's body language or vocal language or sign language. There's, of course, a whole world of conversation there as well.
Awesome. For those listening, this will be the end of part 1, and we'll see you again in part 2. We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.